Hello and welcome to the first episode of Cooking from the Pioneer Pantry. My name is Corey Van Zyfeld. In this series, we will explore recipes that early Colorado pioneers could have made using ingredients that they had saved and preserved from the last year's harvest. In this episode, we will be making the humble Johnnycake. So, depending on what part of the country you are from, a Johnnycake would be known by a different name. It could be a journey cake, a Shawnee cake, an ash cake, a hoe cake, or a dodger, to name a few. For the sake of this demonstration, I will be calling it a Johnnycake. But where did the name Johnnycake come from? Some historians think that it's an adaptation of the name journey cake, or a cake that you take with you on a journey. Other historians think that it could be a mispronunciation of the name Shawnee cake, and eventually it turned into Johnny cake, and Johnny cake is what stuck. So to make our Johnny cakes today, we are going to use a very basic recipe of corn flour, hot water, and salt. And then we'll also be using a little bit of lard to grease our pans. Now, as I'm making my recipe, I have my corn flour here in a bowl, and I just need to add about 2 teaspoons of salt. And I'll throw that in and mix it, incorporate it until it's all nicely incorporated. That way we don't have any patches of salt or very saltiness. And then on top of that, we will pour in our hot water until it's the right consistency. Now I'm only adding a little bit at a time and stirring it in between. The consistency that we are going for is like a thick bread dough. Now depending on who's making it and where they're making it, some people will actually make this into a very runny, almost pancake-like batter consistency. But it's really just a personal preference. So it's questionable where Johnny cakes came from. It is thought that maybe Johnny cakes were introduced to the European colonists by the Native Americans. It is also thought that Johnny cake is an adaptation of the cakes that the British made using oats or barley back in England. And when they got to this country, they used the more readily available corn flour instead of oats and barley. Now, as you can see, I just keep adding my hot water, and it's getting stiffer and stiffer. It's not quite there yet. So now we are making a very basic recipe, just using our 3 ingredients. However, if you have other ingredients, you can add to this to make it more interesting. So for example, you could use milk instead of the water. You could also add some sort of animal fat or cooking fat, so lard or butter or olive oil. You can also add a little bit of sugar if you'd like. I found though that the corn flour is actually pretty sweet, so I don't know if you would need it. And then finally, you could also add some sort of leavening, so baking powder, and that would just make it a little bit more light and fluffy and airy. All right, so this looks like it's just about done. I can show it to you. So you can see it has a nice kind of stiff texture, but it still will hold together when I form it into cakes. All right, now that our dough is all mixed together, I have moved over to the fireplace so I can start cooking. But first, before that, what I'll do is I'll take a little bit of my dough and just pat it into a circle here. And I want to make sure that it's thin enough that it'll cook well on both sides. Now that I have done that, I might do another one just real quick. And we are ready to start frying. Now, I have my lard, and this is to grease my pan, so just to give it a little oil to cook with. I have a couple tablespoons here. I'll start with maybe about a tablespoon to begin with, and I'll put it into my preheated frying pan. Now, as these cook, I may have to add a little bit more lard because I notice that they start to absorb a lot of that fat as they cook. But for now, we'll just start with that. And I'll spread it around until it is all melted. Now, to know that my frying pan is ready, once my lard is melted, that'll help indicate to me that it's ready. Another thing that I can do is just take a little bit of the dough and put it into the cooking lard. When it sizzles, then I know it's ready. So it's sizzling, so I can put my first Johnnycake in. So I'll put my Johnnycakes in and just let them sit in the frying oil for a little while. Now, depending on how hot your frying pan actually is, it can take anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes to cook. As I'm cooking, I'll just every so often lift up the corner of my Johnnycake and check to make sure that it's golden brown. Obviously, it's not there quite yet. It'll take me a little while. So now that our Johnnycakes have been cooking for a little while, I'm going to check again to see if it's starting to turn golden brown. It is. It'll also feel a little bit crispier on that side. I'll do the same to the other one. And same thing. Now we'll let it cook on the other side for a while as well. So another name, as I mentioned before, for Johnnycakes is hoe cakes. Now some people think that they were actually cooked on the hoe that you use in your garden. That, however, is not the case. So historically, another name for a griddle was a hoe. So they were used interchangeably depending on who was talking about them. So that's where the name hoe cake comes from. So as we're cooking, you can see I have my coals here, which my coals is the hottest part of my fire. And I cook over coals rather than over my fire itself because my fire doesn't give me an even heat. If I were to cook, it might 1 minute make this side of the pan hotter, the next minute this side of the pan hotter, and it'd take forever to cook my food thoroughly. But using the coals, which are this gray pile right here, that ensures that I get a nice even heat all the way around my frying pan. So that allows me to cook my food much more quickly and efficiently. All right, our Johnnycakes have been cooking for another while, and it looks like they're done. You can see that they're golden and crispy. So to eat my Johnnycakes, what I can do is I can either eat them as a side dish to salt pork or some other meat. I can put some sort of topping on them to make them a little sweeter or jazz them up a bit. So I could use butter or sugar or molasses or honey. But I could also eat them plain, which I kind of like eating them that way. So sometimes this might be your only dish. In the past, you may have only had those 3 ingredients: water, flour, and salt. So you would be eating this or some version of it all day, every day, until you were able to find other ingredients. So thank you for watching and joining us today as we explored Johnnycakes. A version of this recipe that you can cook at home can be found on the City of Littleton's website under the Museum page, and look for Museum at Home. We look forward to seeing you again, and join us on our future episode as we cook dried apple pie.